Today, I'm working on my 1990 Ford Bronco II. Now, when I bought this, it wasn't in the best of shape. It had been rolled over by the previous owner and has some sealing issues around the back. And what that led to is some rust damage in the back and some body damage from the water getting in. Another issue it had was that the previous owner cut out a piece of the trunk floor to access the fuel pump. Now, that's pretty standard for these types of trucks because they are a pain to get the fuel tank out. So it's not incredibly uncommon to cut out a access port in the truck itself to get to the top of the fuel tank. So today we're going to replace this with a 3D printed version that will hopefully seal a little bit better. Now, the truck itself has some damage in the back floor, so I'm not really looking for anything super permanent. But this is definitely a huge chunk out of it, and I don't want to weld directly onto the fuel tank. I also don't want to take the fuel tank out because it is, I believe, original, and those bolts are not going to be coming out easily. So what I want to do is just 3D print this exactly as it sits, and then try and, I don't know, put some flanges on it and see if we can wedge this in there, or maybe I'll just create some spacers. I don't really know exactly how I'm going to do this, but we're going to figure it out together.
I'm not sure I do very clearly, but we can make it up as we go along.
The first step was to design and 3D print a small stand to hold the plate upright, allowing me to use a flatbed scanner. This method provides a simple and effective way to capture the plate's shape before tracing in CAD. What I learned very quickly was that the two ends were a little bit distorted and they didn't exactly line up the way I thought that they were going to. So I just extruded them to connect the two distances based on the gap that I had measured and was going to try and go from there and figure it out as I was going along. I knew that I'd have to make some adjustments, but I figured that I could play with this. So I extruded it and then I cut it in half because this big plate wouldn't fit on my printer. Now, if you see right here how they're identical, it's because I made a mistake and printed one side twice. So what makes sense here is to follow the contours of the truck as it is in place. Now, to make it easier to print and to make the design work a little bit better, I'm just cleaning it up, and I realized that I need to make it a little bit thicker because when I printed the two pieces exactly the same, it was basically paper thin. So I knew I needed to make it thicker, and then making it flat on the top just kind of made sense since it was going to be a plate going over it. And that's when I realized that maybe I was way over engineering this and I could go with a much simpler design.
Ooh, light bulb moment.
So I threw out my entire earlier sketch and disregarded the plate that I had taken out. I did some basic measurements off of the hole that I was trying to fill and came up with a simple design that filled it with roughly those numbers. Then what I did was I created this design here where there's two sections that would kind of connect together and have a plug that would allow them to kind of sit together but be spaced out. This two-piece setup, slightly smaller than the measured hole, allowed me to position the ends flush against either side. By measuring the gap in the middle, I could determine the true overall dimension. I just added that distance into the design, and I was good to go. I added the measured gap to the design at the midpoint, included a large registration tab to securely lock the two pieces together, and then added some screw holes for mounting. For no particular reason, I also rounded the edges before sending the final design to the printer. Now, the first time it went to the printer, it failed about 20 minutes into it. So I had to start over. Now, this print ran for about 8 hours. What you are seeing here is crunched down into just over 15 seconds. I have a Creality K1C, which is a great budget printer for anybody looking to get high quality prints for less than $700. Now, this had a mix of RTV, household silicone, and Bondo. So I started out with a little die grinder. That did a little bit, but it didn't take some of the Bondo off, and then the paint didn't come off either. So I went to a wire wheel just on a drill, and this really did a great job. It got a lot of the paint off, took the Bondo off pretty easily, and the silicone wasn't really that big of a deal. Most of it I was able to scrape off. But this gave me a nice, decent surface that I could paint over to at least give us a little bit of better adhesion. So after I took the old metal piece off, I noticed that the fuel tank vent was not connected to the hose, and that was because it was broken. So I cleaned it off as best I could, and then grabbed some pliers and some small needle nose and started just kind of going at it. This was kind of a pain. I had to play with it for quite a bit, and then eventually I went over and got a screwdriver to pry it out. Now, the seal itself was actually in great shape. It definitely wasn't original, so somebody had replaced this at some point. So this was in pretty good shape when I went to put it back together. I had a hard time getting the plastic fitting to go back into that, so I did just squirt a little bit of Marvel Mystery Oil on it, and then it popped right in. Marvel's safe to use in this application because Marvel can be put in the gas without any problems. While I have this open, I cleaned off the top of the fuel pump and the whole top of the tank with some carb cleaner and an air gun. This is something that would benefit me in the future if I ever either need to get up here from underneath or get back in there, at least it's clean. So I took some more blue shop rags and put them just on top of the fuel tank pump and the vent so that it would be protecting it from overspray, and then I wiped down the edge where I'm about to paint with some cleaner to make sure that we get all the oil and grease off of that. I'm not really trying to do a great job here, just kind of prevent the heavy rust from hitting the bare metal. One tool that I cannot recommend enough are these little tiny air dryers. This one I got for $3 at a thrift store, but I have actually two of these. One of them is just brown, it doesn't have any thing on it. But these are great. They're basically disposable. You can use them when you're painting or you need to dry something. They're very small. They fit in your toolbox nicely. Highly recommend it if you can pick these up real cheap. Now I grabbed the closest can of spray paint that I had, was this blue color, and I knew I was going to kind of top coat this with black, so I didn't really care about the color. Again, this whole thing is rusted out, so I'm just trying to protect the bare metal, buy myself a little bit of time. And you can cheat with spray paint and make it dry a lot faster by using a little hair dryer like this. Now just a quick top coat with black and we are ready to do a dry fit. So I took the two pieces and put them together and dropped it into the hole, kind of looking all the way around, seeing how it feels, seeing how everything looks. Everything is exactly perfect. No real big gaps, but really in a good situation here.
You have made a very grave error, gentlemen.
So unfortunately I put too much glue in the seam and then it wouldn't come back together as one solid piece that fit nicely. So I had to take it back out and then with a pick scrape out all of the glue, or as much as I could, until I got it back together. And then with some tapping and a little bit of shaking, I was able to kind of wedge it into place. This actually ended up being pretty okay. I was able to screw down the four corners, which made it fit really nicely. The glue spreading it at the middle really made for a nice tight fit. So I pre-drilled the holes and then put in some stainless steel screws that I had lying around for this project and put it together. Now I am just using a standard hot glue gun here, which I've measured this tip to read around 180 degrees. Since PETG prints at approximately 220 degrees, the glue bonds really well, fusing the pieces together while also adding mass as a filler. As long as you go slow and use the tip to melt the plastic, it creates a strong and durable bond, at least in my experience. So I did have a little bit of an issue trying to get this out. Because the gap was a little bit bigger than I had designed, because the glue in between them really kind of opened it up ever so slightly, it just barely doesn't fit inside of this. And it wasn't exactly square, which I knew, which was kind of the benefit of printing it in two pieces, is that it could square itself up. So when I took it out and flipped it over, I just glued it the same way I did the other side. Now that the two pieces were really fused together, it was acting as one solid piece. There was really no flex in it, even at the seam. So I had a little bit of a hard time getting it back into place. I had to use a small hammer and a flat blade screwdriver in order to kind of wedge it in there. But once I got it back in there and screwed it down tight, everything looked great. Since everything was going so well, I decided to fix the rest of the floor with some hot glue and plug all of the holes.
Is he kidding me or what?
Now, when we're looking at this as the final product, it's definitely not perfect. We can see over here, there's a gap that's a little bit bigger than I would want. This side definitely fits nice and tight. There's no gap, no anything. The side here is pretty good. It doesn't really have any play to it on either side. Really wedged in there. The seal is pretty good. So it's really just this is the biggest gap all the way around. Now, the problem is that when I put this in here, I kind of had to slide it underneath here and then drop it down. So I could hammer this down, hammer the metal part of this down, which would make that gap go away. But I'm worried that I'd never be able to get this out without cutting it, and that would kind of defeat the purpose. Now, that being said, one of the great benefits of 3D printing is that I can just save this file and make a new one in a couple hours. So this one took about 8 hours to print. It's about 20% infill in PETG plus CF. So I could just reprint this. If I had to cut into it again, I could. but I don't really want to get in here. I'm hoping not to have any fuel tank issues. While I had this open, I did look in there and the fuel tank was pretty clean, so I don't think I'll have to get in here too often, but I do want it to be somewhat removable so I can get in there if I ever needed to. Now obviously this floor is not in the best shape anyway, definitely could use some work. There's quite a few holes that are poking through here, and it's definitely not going to be sealed up tight. Now the exhaust does come out the side, I haven't welded that in yet, but as a future project that will be to put the exhaust on, it'll come out the side. So not too worried about that. Overall though, I'm really happy with how this came out. It really fits perfectly on the sides, considering I just guessed on the angles, I didn't measure anything. Melting the seam in with some hot glue has really kept it perfectly rigid. There's no flex here, and then screwing it down will hold it. Now, if this was a better situation, or if the floor was in better shape rather, I probably would RTV this into place, and I might do that anyway because there's some big holes. And I might use a smoke machine to see where the holes are and try and plug them as best I can to stop it. But realistically, this whole floor needs to be cut out and replaced at some point. But that's not really what I'm trying to do right now. I'm trying to get this on the road, get it completely back together, and then we can start doing the improvements that are needed like that. Because if this sits in the garage forever, I'm never going to have the motivation to finish it, and I don't want to do that. So that looks a lot better than that though. So I'm very happy.